Anchors of War, Chapter 3. Year 509,684, Month 5, Day 26 Galactic Standard Time, aboard HFY Dominion Super Dreadnought Everlasting Bloodlust, Hannah's Star. Fleet Leader, report to the bridge, said Puds, his voice urgent. Queequeg stirred groggily. What was it now? The last bunker had fallen hours ago, and there was no way any of their captives could escape, not even these incredibly determined beings. Sure, there were a few small hostile bands left on the surface, but most of the remaining humans were already in shackles and awaiting orders to work. Fleet Leader, report to the bridge immediately, repeated Puds, adding command to his urgency. Queequeg scowled. He would have to reprimand Pud for that. He couldn't let himself be ordered around by a mere shipmaster. Sighing, he got up from his large bed and made his way to the bridge of the Everlasting Bloodlust. Upon his arrival, he was greeted by the sound of shouted conversations and excited tones. Shaking away the last vestiges of sleep, he made his way to the hollow tank. It was currently magnifying the system edge opposite to the one they had entered from, and the tank was full of ships, hundreds of them, excited. Queequeg called up the statistics that he could on the vessels. Unidentified origin, of course. Covered in weapons, from the scans, their shields seemed to be weaker than those on his ships, but not incredibly so. On a ship-for-ship basis, his had more mass and size. However, the enemy fleet had more capital ships. Not a huge numerical advantage, but an advantage for them nonetheless. It consisted of 6 super dreadnoughts, 12 dreadnoughts, 24 battleships, -1 battle cruisers, 50 assorted heavy and light cruisers, 90 destroyers, and 200 frigates and corvettes. Eagerly, Queequeg began sending out orders. He would have to evacuate the remaining troops and prisoners. Maybe he would even bring some slaves back with him. He could never bring them off the ship, of course. They were illegal. But they could also be useful. His fleet should also destroy their last few bunkers, just to make sure nobody fought it up in them again, while the fleet was occupied. The final order he gave was to accelerate to meet the enemy fleet, keeping the aggressor on formation. This was going to be a glorious and honorable battle. The 3rd of February 2904, Sol Confederation Navy ship Mars, Hannah's Star. Admiral Hackett studied the hollow tank closely, searching for advantages he could exploit. The enemy admiral seemed eager for battle, having accelerated towards his fleet minutes after they had dropped anchor. He looked at the resources he had for super dreadnoughts and to super dreadnought carriers. 12 dreadnoughts, 20 battleships, and for battleship carriers. 30 battle cruisers and 6 battle cruiser carriers. Hundreds of escorts and screening vessels. Not the most impressive fleet, certainly, but not small or weak either. Hopefully, the hostile fleet hadn't realized that he had so much small craft support. If he managed to surprise the enemy with a fighter bomber swarm, he might be able to gain a critical advantage. The fleet's shields were already tuned to deal with particle beam weapons. From what they had seen of the combat over Hannah's world, those were the only weapons they used. They might have missiles, of course. However, from what his analysts and their computers had seen, those ships didn't have any discernible missile launch ports. They could be pod-based, he supposed, although that was unlikely. They knew for sure that the enemy fleet had no kinetic weapons, which were the bread and butter of all human warships. At the moment, his fleet was arrayed in 3 closely stacked chevrons, each containing an equal number of ships. The plan was to break through the enemy fleet with the spinal railguns of the capital ships, using fighters, bombers, and nuclear missiles to soften them up. Hopefully, he could disable the command ship he wanted answers. 2/3, 2,900 fort, unidentified HFY Dominion warship, Hannah's Star. Matthew awoke to angry yelling, or at least he thought it was angry yelling. The words being spoken made no sense to him, and the bed he was on felt strange. Not only that, but he could hear various background noises that told him he was probably on a starship or a large ground vehicle. But since as far as he knew the aliens only brought starships, he bet he was on one of those. He slowly opened his eyes, wincing slightly as he saw bright lights. He was on a padded table of some kind, with what looked to be steel restraints on his limbs. There was also some strange machine coming out of the wall hanging over him. It had a bunch of little arms, some of which seemed to hold surgical equipment. Maybe it was an auto dock, He pushed against the restraints on his arms, testing them a little. They were definitely solid. Almost forgetting about it, he looked at his shoulder. The wound he had taken was patched, but there was a scar there. It was the same for the wound on his abdomen, and then he realized he was wearing nothing but underwear. And they weren't the ones he had been wearing when he passed out after killing that armored guy. Trying and failing to get rid of that somewhat disquieting though, he looked at his captors. His orange, to few-fingered captors. Year 509,684, Month 5, Day 26 Galactic Standard Time, aboard Disecri Dominion Super Dreadnought Everlasting Bloodlust, Hannah's Star. You want to what? Yelled Queekry, angry at having been distracted by this matter. Clearly the death of Sekvri's son had driven him insane, and Queekry wasn't sure why he hadn't already had Sekvri relieved of his command. I want to try this ballless piece of shit fuck nugget scumbag for terrorism, shouted Sekvri, his normally pale orange face going a much darker shade. His son would be avenged, and this human soldier from hell would die and be disgraced for his crimes. You want to tell the galaxy what we do out here? You know we would be the ones who were executed, yelled Queekry, even more upset that Sekvri wouldn't just drop it and prepare his troops. Look, we can get some sympathy from the other powers if Hes convicted, especially if we can make it out like whoever's fleet is about to fight us-sponsored terrorists to strike at us, and then launched a surprise attack on our frontier colony, said Sekvri, his voice still raised, but he wasn't quite as loud as before. That's insane and stupid, but Queekry thought about it. Maybe he could do this favor for Sekvri if he used that rationale with the leadership, especially since Sekvri family were very powerful politically, and it would please them to see their kin avenged and the killer so discredited. As long as Sekvri knew he owed Queekry a favor for bringing it up with the leadership, a favor from Sekvri and his family would be more than enough recompense for any ill consequences from this act, assuming nobody let the human talk with anyone who would believe his story. I think I might be able to swing it. Also, you would owe me a favor, and not a small one. Queekry finished, his voice lowered significantly. Sekvri nodded. A deal had been made. Sisian would be avenged. His killer known by everyone in this galactic region as a ruthless terrorist who kills innocents, and Queekry would have his favor. A fair trade. But first, I would like to ask this human some questions. I want to know where it got its training, so when we conquer the planet it's on and destroy any trace of that place, said Sekvri, turning to look at the pale-skinned and dark-haired being on the operating table, which was at this point looking straight at him. Neither of them had even realized that the man was awake. Queekry left, not caring about the outcome of the upcoming conversation, withdrawing his communications unit from a pocket in his uniform and putting it in translate mode. Sekvri walked over to the alien and took a seat at its bedside. 2/3, 2,904, unidentified Disecri Dominion warship, Hannah's Star. Matthew was now somewhat alarmed. There was an angry-looking orange alien in uniform coming towards him, holding some kind of device. He strained at his bonds a little, already knowing he couldn't escape from them. The alien sat at a seat next to him and placed a device on a nearby table. Then the alien spoke some unintelligible gibberish. Opening his mouth, about to say he couldn't understand, he was interrupted. "What is your name, scum?" said the alien's little device, in perfect English. Momentarily stunned, Matthew didn't reply for a moment. When the alien started looking annoyed though, he spoke. "My name is Matthew Franklin, and I am a member of the Hannah's World Colonial Militia, triple citizen of the United Systems, Sol Confederation, and the independent colony of Hannah's World," said Matthew, trying to inject calm into his voice. What he said was a moment later supposedly translated by the alien's device into whatever language that guy spoke. Most of it was different, but he picked out a few things, like his name, Hannah, and Sol. "So, Matthew Franklin, where did you receive your excellent training? The training that made you charge into battle with a superior force instead of surrendering like anyone else would. The training that allowed you to take on a special forces man in full combat armor with a knife in single combat and win," the alien said, his attention rapt. I just sort of did it. It wasn't training. I'm not particularly well trained. I'm not in the military or anything. In fact, I'm a teacher. I used to go to the range once in a while, I guess, but I never really practiced with melee weapons. And I attacked your guys, because I had to protect the people in that bunker. That wasn't training either, said Matthew, nonplussed. Did you really think that would fool me? You killed a man in full battle armor with an energy knife, the alien said, sneering. Obviously, the alien didn't believe him. Matthew wasn't sure why. Was it really so far-fetched that he had killed one skilled guy with a knife? No, really. It's the truth. I just rushed him, and then got him with a feint. Simple, really. He was overconfident, said Matthew, annoyed. Don't you dare belittle him, shouted the alien suddenly, made all the more terrifying by the translator's slight delay, during which he had no idea what the orange guy had said. Matthew jumped a little in his restraints, heart beating at the speed of light. So, this alien must have really liked that guy. Maybe the alien he had killed was a relative or a friend or something. He couldn't change that now, but hopefully he could avoid enraging his alien captor further. Unfortunately, it seemed too late for that, as the alien started punching Matthew in the shoulder, where his recently healed wound was. Howling in pain, Matthew tried to do something, only able to shift under his restraints. Then, the alien started wailing on his abdomen wound, and then on his face. Trying to curl into some kind of half-fetal position, Matthew thought about what the fuck he did to deserve this bullshit. The 4th of February 2904, Sol Confederation Navy Ship Mars, Hannah Star. Admiral, we are nearing the maximum powered range of our missiles. Should we activate ECM and cyber warfare measures? SAID Captain Forrester, with suppressed eagerness. Admiral Hackett nodded. He turned to a small hollow tank next to his seat, where the somewhat translucent figure of an A's avatar looked back at him. Ours, do your thing, said Hackett commandingly. The A's avatar definitely looked like a god of war, being adorned in skulls and bloody swords. Will do, Admiral, said the AI, which promptly disappeared. He already knew what to do. Ours was never one for extended conversation, unlike some other eyes. Turning back to the hollow tank, he frowned slightly. He should give the order righty about now. Orders to the fleet. Immediate execute to all carriers. Release fighter and bomber complements. All other ships. Activate ECM and begin launching probing bombardment. Hackett said, a weight seeming to lift off of his shoulders. The battle for Hannah's Star had begun.